So if we move forward to 1974, the event chart again is in the middle, the natal is the inner, and the progressed is the outer. So in 74 he began to pick up the pace and he started murdering women more and more often. He did it in a quicker manner, a more fierce manner. He was more adept at doing it. He was getting better at doing it. Okay, on this day, transiting Uranus at 27 degrees of Libra was stationary, ready to go retrograde. So that's something to notice, that in the third house there, his third house, Uranus, which was another trigger in that, remember the first chart, another point of interest was Uranus, has now gone stationary. So Uranus again is doing something. This stationary is going to go direct, and transit wise or event wise, it's forming a trine to Mercury on the 7th house cusp. So his Uranus and Mercury, we've got Mercury is the dispositor of dispositorship of Uranus here, but Uranus is disposed by Venus. So where's Venus in the transiting chart? Look at that, 29 degrees of Capricorn. Oop, another 29. I do like seeing the 29s. They show us quite a lot. Okay, so the ultimate dispositor of these two here, which I was looking at because that stationary, is a 29 degree Capricorn Venus. That's interesting. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on because 29 Capricorn pops up later. All right, let's have a proper look here. Okay, so let's just have a look at the 29s. Venus at 29, transiting Saturn. Oh, 28, 28, so close. The progressed Sun, look at that, 29. We've got some 29 degree action here for sure. That's interesting. Okay, so what else do we have? We have the progressed moon. So let's get back to this 4th house here. This progressed moon is at 16 degrees of Sagittarius, which is conjunct his natal moon. How's that? His progressed moon's gone all the way around, probably a couple of times, no, once, twice, maybe twice, and has come back to its natal position. So there we have a trigger with the moon, and look at that, the event, 5:30 a.m. that day when Linda Ann Healy was murdered, the ascendant was 18 degrees Sagittarius, so that was conjunct both of these moons, the progressed moon and the natal moon. So once again, the female aspect of this came out and is triggered by 1 degree. And as you'll see here, we've got the ascendant of the progressed chart is now the 2nd house cusp, and that is squaring this set here, ascendant moon, ascendant moon, is squaring what's now become the ascendant, which is the 2nd house cusp. That's interesting. So if we move that up, that means that Leo would be up here somewhere, and the 2nd house cusp has now become Venus ruled, which takes us back to Venus at 29 degrees of Capricorn, which to me is really interesting, and you're going to see why soon. Relates very much so to the end of his life. Okay. Okay, Mercury is at 26 degrees Aquarius. It is trining the stationary Uranus. Transiting Saturn is nearly at 29 degrees, but just at 28, so that is in place of where Mars was in that previous chart, the last murder. Where Mars was, now Saturn sits. So that's interesting. His progressed Sun has moved to 29 degrees, so there's a real precipice for 29 degrees. It's like the edge of something. It's when someone's really ready to snap. And I think that's definitely the point with Ted Bundy here. By 1974, he was in the midst of wanting to kill, you know, women and do all these things. So he was really ready to snap. And Venus being at 29, the Sun being at 29, and Saturn being near 29 shows me that he was pretty on edge at this point in time. His progressed Mercury is conjunct his natal Mars as well. See, Mars is at 13 and Mercury is at 12. We've got 1 degree difference. But again, there's more fourth, you know, it's just constant with him. We've got fourth house triggers all the time. The planets that in his natal chart that were at the beginning of the fourth house and around the IC are now moving off over to here and hitting the planets around the end of the fourth house. So you'll see the pattern, you know, you're seeing the pattern as it moves along. These planets are moving slowly, these are moving really fast, but all the while they're still hitting different degrees in his natal chart and in his progressed chart. The transiting Moon and Mars on this day is conjunct in Taurus, which is conjunct his MC, and it's in the 9th house. But I mean, have a look at this, Moon and Mars conjunct. You know, that's pretty amazing. You've got the same two planets transiting and natal conjunct his midheaven and his Mars and the Moon, and they're in conjunct as well. In conjuncts are really, which is this, really pivotal to Bundy's life, and seems to be a lot of the aspects that trigger things off seem to be a quincunx or a conjunction to this area here, like I discussed before. So yeah, lots of inconjuncts and conjunctions. It's interesting. Here we have progressed Venus at 20 degrees of Scorpio. That's come back around to exactly where the natal Venus was. So you'll remember natal Venus was retrograde, so that's gone back and forward and blah blah, and now it's moved, going back to its natal position. So it's so interesting that his Moon and his Venus has gone back to his natal position in 1974, a long time after he was born. So yeah, it is very interesting. It's not nice, but it's interesting. Okay, what else can we see here? Get rid of all this. Okay, so just to sum things up quickly at the moment, let's have a look at some key players. Now, I know that a lot, like I think I said before, a lot of astrologers don't like to use the transiting Moon, the Sun or Venus or Mars because they're very quick. In event astrology, it's important to use them because they become triggers. As you've known, as you can see from what I've shown you, you'll see that. So I always use the Moon. I always use the Moon in every chart that I do in that's relative to criminal astrology. the moon is a key player. It's in Bundy's chart, for example, in his feminine energy, and for the women that cared for him and his family and his childhood. And I believe that he's been caught up in the past with this Scorpio IC and everything that's going on in the 4th house. It's very, very caught up. So the moon, I mean, the moon co-rules everything that we do in all these charts as well, co-rules the person in question. But it doesn't just co-rule in terms of when we're looking natally like this. It shows us the importance of the feminine divine in a person's life, and if they don't have it, then they don't care about females. You know, and just conjunct Mars here shows us that this can happen to him. So with the external influence of his mother and grandfather, everything becomes skewed. You know, makes sense when you think of it like that. It doesn't make it right, but it makes sense. Okay, another important thing that I always look at, obviously, Saturn. Saturn is death, power, authority, the father figure, the grandfather, and it shows us timing as well. I think I mentioned that before. So yeah, but I mean, yeah, like I've said, you know, Bundy's Saturn is in a terrible position. It's in its fall. It's detrimental as it's in the 12th house, where it just sits in prison. Basically, it's restrictive. So it's restricting his ability to use that Saturn in a better way. The Judge, which is also very Saturnian, in the Netflix series, proceeded to tell him how great he would have been at law and blah blah blah, and how good he was and whatever. Yeah, if he'd have used his Saturn correctly, if he didn't, perhaps if he wasn't, you know, incestuously bred and all the other things that happened to him, and perhaps if he didn't have this chart, that wouldn't have happened. But hey, he did. Okay, so again, just going back to this IC, his childhood, his genetics, his heritage, the deep secrets of the family, the aspects between these two that we've discussed, shows the presence of deep resentment of the divine female, if you will. He can't see the female as being a beautiful entity because he resents her completely. His IC, or his womb and tomb, at 16 degrees of Scorpio there, actually just really becomes a point of aspect to most of the transit and progress planets throughout his life. So this wounding is something that constantly comes up, and he acts upon it when the moon, the sun, and Saturn and Mars do something to aspect something else or go to a critical point like 29. That's what happens. Yeah, so I mean, I won't go on more and more about that, but as you can see, repetitively we're looking at the sun, Mars, the moon, Saturn, Venus, because of the nature of his crimes as well, is obviously very important. But repetitively we're looking at the same things, and they're all triggering off the same types of aspects. Okay, let's move along. Okay, on the 14th of January 78, after he escaped, he killed heaps of girls. He was probably at his, I don't know what you would call it, the epitome of his desire to murder people at this point in time. It's ridiculous that he even was able to escape, but because he's got that charm and affability of that Leo rising, it certainly helped him get away because he was given privileges. Okay, let's have a look at something. So what do I say that we always have to look at when we look at a chart? The moon, Saturn, Mars and everything. Immediately my eye went here to Saturn. Transiting Saturn once again is at 29 degrees, but this time of Leo. So now Saturn is conjunct his IC at a critical degree in that horrid fixed sign. He amped it up. At this point he's amped it up. He wanted to murder as many people as he could, and he attacked a lot of people at this point in time on this day, and he went to a couple of places to do it as well. Okay, so what else have we got here? We've got progressed Mercury at 18 degrees of Saggy, conjunct his moon, his natal moon. And look at that. We've got transiting Neptune, conjunct his natal moon, and Mercury as well. So once again, we've got that combination of Mercury, Neptune, and the moon in his 4th house. Again, it hasn't moved anywhere. We're not looking over here or everything's always in that 4th house. Once again, he was pissed at something that happened when he was a child. He can't get over it, you see. Saturn, 29 degrees here. He can't get over it. Saturn just is, it's the problem, the bane of his existence. And here we have transiting Mars at 4 degrees of Leo, conjunct progressed and natal Saturn now. So here we have those two malefics again. We had that in a couple of charts ago, if you'll recall. Okay, we have, let's have a look. Where's his progressed moon? It's at 3 degrees of Aquarius. It's forming a wide opposition to Saturn, but it's still opposing, but it's forming a very tight opposition to Mars. So his progressed moon is opposing, transiting Mars, and opposing his progressed and natal Saturn. Women meant nothing to him at that point in time. Not a sausage. Did not care less. The transiting moon was at 13 degrees of Aries. So what was that doing? Trining his natal Pluto at 13 degrees of Leo, exactly 13 and 13. They're making a trine to each other. So that's, have a look, see that moon's in the 8th house as well. So again, we've got the 8th, the 12th, the 4th, all aspecting each other. The moon and Pluto aspecting each other is his disdain towards women as well, so it comes just from everywhere. Let's clean this up a bit. So his progressed moon is opposite Mars and Saturn, we saw that. Okay, his transiting Neptune we saw is exactly conjunct his moon, so right now he is out of his mind, probably drunk actually, or on drugs. Wouldn't surprise me around that time if he was using some sort of drugs or alcohol. I'm not 100% sure about his alcohol usage. I think he was an alcoholic or into drinking for a short period of time. Okay, so that's an exact conjunction. Not great. Not great at all. His progressed moon we discussed opposing these areas. So we've got the 6th and 12th house opposition as well. Again, we keep having this 4th, 10th, 6th, 12th opposition. Everything hits the moon, Mars, and the sun, and Saturn and Pluto, and I've missed out on talking about it the majority of the time, but every time we're looking at 17, 18 degrees, it's opposing his natal and transiting, natal and progressed Uranus as well. So that's triggering off something too. So there's a trigger for everything. Alright, go back. Get rid of this again. What else can I spy? I see transiting Jupiter at 28 degrees of Gemini. And if I recall correctly, that the last chart we looked at, Saturn was there, and the time before that, Mars was there. So 28 degrees of Gemini, it's really pivotal in his event charts. A point that triggers him off to need to do something like that. I mean, by that time he'd escaped. He escaped out of the legal library, Jupiter, which is interesting. But Jupiter's in its detriment there, so that pretty much shows us that inevitably he was going to get caught too. But we're not looking at the event charts, obviously. Here we're looking at everything. But as we'll see, in the event chart, Jupiter was conjunct the MC, so that sort of shows me that it's pretty clear that he was going to get caught. But just once again, I'm quite amazed at this 29 degree Leo transiting here. I think that's quite amazing that it happens transiting as well on these days that he commits these murders. Something that we need to consider more and more with criminal charts is these 29 degree points, I think. Absolutely. Okay, and as we'll just see up here as well, his progressed midheaven has gone to 18 degrees of Gemini, which is now conjunct his Uranus as well. So he's going to shock the world, and he did. You know, he found great pleasure in escaping and killing these girls. He set his mind to it, his Mercury. He was delusional enough to think that he could escape to a faraway place, Sagittarius then. And it also, Neptune in Sagittarius here, can just basically show us that the end result of this point in time was due to him escaping, Neptune, out of the law library, Sagittarius. So there's that. Okay, and then quickly again with the transiting moon at 13 degrees of Aries. If we look down here and see 13 Sag, Mars natally, we'll see that trines. So we've got the moon trining natal Mars, transiting moon trining natal Mars. That's a trigger to me. It's an exact degree. I mean, it's not a conjunction, it's a trine, but still, it's in the 8th house and it's going to the 4th house. And as we've seen throughout the whole thing, these are all connected all the time. Okay. That's the important one there. All right, let's move along again.